Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about some more pre-modern stuff. We've got the pre-modern decks from the pre-modern online monthly. This one is for June. Got a whole bunch of people, about 100 or so. A lot of different stuff going on. Very cool, very cool. Cool new decks, cool new tech. Of course, you know the drill. People are always busy, busy, busy making really sweet stuff. So let's get into it. All right, and now we have, first off, in the 16th place, we have The Rock. And this is a pretty typical rock list. This is the one without our good friend Birds of Paradise. We have instead the Wall of Blossoms, Wall of Roots thing, which again makes sense. I'm a, I think I still like Bop more, right? Just the mana fixing's really nice, and it's really great. Like turn one Bop, like turn two Therapy into Duress or double therapy or whatever, or removal into a thing or just whatever. Um, I think that is a little bit. I just like those play patterns a little bit better, but I don't think the 8 wall is actually bad or anything like that. That's certainly a legitimate way to go about it. Obviously, Wall Blossoms, Wall Roots, very sweet, if albeit a little bit slower than Birds of Paradise, of course. Anyways, nothing too weird here. We got some Deranged Hermit, we got some Ravenous Baloth, we got some nasty, blasty, nasty, blasty Derm, which of course is great. The only thing really strange here would be 25 lands instead of 24 typically. I don't think you really need to go that high, but this deck does have a bunch of Mistress Factories and Treetop Villages, so it's not like it's lacking in mana sinks. So a lot of good stuff here, and of course, gotta love that sideboard Null Rod, just so good against a lot of the artifact heavy decks. So think of something like in the combo decks, so maybe Devourer or anything like the Tinker decks, that kind of stuff. Null Rod, very sweet there. All right, and now we have, of course, it's Sly, and nothing too strange here. We do have a main deck Lava Dart, right, and some of the flex slots, as well as some Lava Darts in the sideboard. Nothing too wonky here, although Flaring Pain is a very good card, although no Anarchy, again, it's a little weird to me, but that's okay. I think certainly Flaring Pain does sort of serve a lot of the same purposes, obviously beating circles of protection, and or story circle, that kind of stuff. But other than that, everything else is pretty typical stuff. But yeah, Lava Dart kind of a little bit pre-boarding versus some of the other aggressive decks, and that's certainly not a bad place to be. All right, and now we have the Pyrostatic Oath lists. This one's a little different because gosh, I can't remember if the other ones played Miri's Guile or not, but I think this card is just about 1,000 times worse than Sylvan Library for obvious reasons, like Sylvan Library will draw you cards, Miri's Guile will not, right? Not exactly rocket surgery there. Um, and of course, Slice and Dice. I mean, with this much burn spells, you know, I mean, there's so many cards that are just so like not good versus decks without a lot of creatures. Slice and Dice being one of them, Pyrokinesis as well. Pretty wonky. I'm not a big fan of like, just like this overloading on like these very limited, albeit powerful sort of spells. I mean, that's not really what I think is a particularly very good, right? Having these sort of super exaggerated matchup spreads where it's like, oh, I'm playing versus a control deck. I have 12 dead cards in my deck. Is not really a great place to be. Uh, anyways, um, Slice and Dice, this is very good versus aggressive decks, but you're already playing a bunch of cards to beat aggressive decks, so I'm not exactly sure this is the best place where you want to be. But there you go. So yeah, there you go. Pyrostatic Oath. All right, now we got some interesting cards for our slide list. There's a few cards that are somewhat uh, cute. Maybe that's not the best word. But let's start off with Reckless Abandon. This card's, obviously 1 mana, 4 damage is pretty good. You do obviously have to sacrifice a creature, so, and a lot of times it's a really bad top deck. And it's obviously contingent upon having, an actual creature to sacrifice, but you don't really want to sacrifice your own creatures outside of like a ball lightning post combat. That's kind of weird. I mean, Reckless Abandon is like fine. I feel like you really want to play more creatures, but even if you're just playing one, I guess that works with this build. But still not. I'm not a huge fan of it. I don't think it's a bad card, so to speak, but it feels ill-fitting here. Key to Encampment. This card's fine. Obviously, it's really bad when you're trying to curve out, but it is better versus, say, like control decks, things like that. But I mean, if you want to be better versus control decks, just play more cards that are good versus control decks that don't screw up your tempo. Like just play more Curse Scroll or something. So I'm not a huge fan of that. So Gitu Encampment, I mean, not a big fan. Again, coming to play tapped is a huge downside. Uh, not a big fan of that guy. Some interesting stuff in the sideboard though. Goblin Tinkerer. This card is obviously good versus Dreadnought versus just other random sort of artifact-based strategies. You can get some value out of it. Sometimes it's just a 3 mana Shatter, which is okay, I guess, because its other mode is just a 2 mana 1/2. So sometimes being a squire is good enough. And Scald. This card is very sweet, not super great versus a lot of the blue decks because so many of them, they can run non-basics that produce blue mana. So Scald can sometimes not really be the hate card you really want, but it's not bad. It's obviously extremely good versus the mono blue storm decks, or anyone else that wants to play, like mono blue control or something. Scald is great there. But for the most part, this is a fairly typical list, minus a couple of these outliers. Oh, I guess I should have mentioned Winter Orb too. That's a good card. That's a good card. Definitely something to keep in mind. Definitely, if you're looking to beat up on mid-range decks or control decks, Winter Orb is a very good card for that kind of thing. All right, and now we have Pit Rack, and this one is not too weird. A lot of the same stuff we've seen. Again, shouldn't be too surprising. We got a few things that are a little bit different. Vendetta, not typically seen in this deck. Of course, it's certainly not a bad card. 1 mana to destroy creatures and stuff. Pretty sweet, pretty sweet. And of course, in the sideboard, we have a 1 of Haunting Echoes. Again, this is a card I've always been extremely happy with in this format. Haunting Echoes is very, very powerful, a win condition in its own right, and these slower, very interactive mid-range and control decks. Haunting Echoes will often just win the game. So very sweet there, of course. And last but not least, we have a 1 of Braid's Cabal Minion. This is pretty strong. Eats lands, things like that. Is another way to deny your opponent's resources. I mean, I guess it's pretty obvious what it does, right? It's not too tricky. If you're trying to deny your opponents all their resources, Braids does a pretty good job of denying your opponent's resources. You can just sack, your lands or whatever, random cards that aren't doing anything, Curse Scroll, additional cards like Bottomless Pit that aren't doing anything, like if you have multiple pits or whatever. So yeah, Braid's pretty interesting card. I'd be curious to know how it performed, but the theory behind it I think is okay. Just as a way to keep your opponent low on permanence, keep cards in their hand, so it makes your discard more effective, locks them out of the game, and even attacks for 2 damage. So that's not too bad. Okay, so now we have a Draco Explosion deck. This one, of course, is Splashing Blue, so we get some really interesting cards here. So of course we have Force Spike. Force Spike, of course, is pretty sweet. Obviously the card is very high variance, but you know, if you're Force Spiking stuff on turn one, that's great. That's a good feeling. Definitely can't beat that. And of course we also have Predict. Predict is a very sweet card, pretty powerful. Obviously there's synergy with your own scroll rack, and it's, I mean, I guess you can obviously use it with Limdol's Vault as well. Uh, Typically, you don't really want to use it otherwise, because you don't really have any other synergies with it. But yeah, good with Scroll Rack, good with Limdol's Vault. Yeah, oh, and I guess it, you know, does screw with top deck tutors. So Enlightened Tutor, there is, you know, some extra value there, so that's kind of nice. Pyromancy. This is a card I remember having like a million years ago. I think I traded it from one of my friends. I can't quite remember. But yeah, this card is, I was like, I would never use this card ever. And, you know, 20 years later, you know, 20 plus years later, now I've found a deck that actually wants to play Pyromancy. This card's very good when you can discard Draco for obvious reasons, because you can deal, you know, 16 damage if you have no other cards in hand, right? Because it's random, but that's kind of neat. So I'm a big fan of the Pyromancy. And since you are playing three colors, you do have Crosis's Charm. So that one's pretty good because it's a Boomerang, a Dark Banishing, and a Shatter. So that's pretty cool. Does a lot of different stuff. I like this card a lot. It's sweet. I just like the art and everything else. So it's very, very cool. So yeah, an interesting take on the sort of typical Draco Blast, just going further into the combo control thing. Obviously, you know, Scroll Rack, very good with, you know, the Draco errata explosion stuff, clearly. So a lot of really interesting stuff, a lot of really cool stuff. I like this deck quite a bit. Apparently it's the real Draco explosion, so there you go. All right, and here we go is a very typical Sly list. Again, we have another 1x main deck Lava Dart. That's where they want to put some of their flex slots, which is okay, but also Seal of Fire. So a lot of people don't like Seal, which is pretty strange, but Seal, very good here. In addition to the 4 shock, I feel like that's, you know, a bit too much. Like, I feel like that's a lot of shocks, right? So I'm a bigger fan of like playing like 2x Volcanic Hammer. You know, getting the extra damage is quite nice. But other than that, this is pretty typical 20 lands. Typical sideboard of Rebs, Overload, Pop, and 3 Tormod's Crypts. So yeah, good stuff here. All right, and now we have Trinity Green. In case you guys don't know, this is a very old deck from the mid to late 90s. That was a mono green land destruction deck. Of course, this deck is splashing black for things like Cabal Therapy, as well as sideboarded things like Recurring Nightmare, Bone Shredder. So some cards that are more, you know, control-y, that are better in different matchups. So think of it as like kind of like the Rock, but with more land destruction. And how they're accomplishing that, of course, is with Plow Under and Fallow Earth. These cards are super fun to play against if you've never been Plow Undered a lot. They actually were printed Plow Under in, gosh, was it 8th and 9th edition? At least 8th edition, I think. Yeah, not really sure what the point was that. I mean, I don't. It's pretty miserable to be Plow Undered. Uh, yeah, not good, not good. So yeah, Plow Under, Foulworth, a lot of mana denial, but also denying you your draw step. Tangle Wire, of course, to lock things down. The deck also plays for Schadenport. That's always fun. Then, of course, you can Sky Shroud Poacher into your Deranged Hermit to put a bunch of dudes in play. You have Living Wish for things like Dust Bowl and Masticore and Gaia's Cradle, and also another Skyshroud Poacher. Stuff like Ravenous Baloth. Baloth is very sweet against aggressive decks, right? You just need the life, so that's kind of cool. Of course, that goes along very well with the main deck Baloths. So yeah, definitely a pretty interesting take on the Trinity Green archetype. Splash and black to shore up some weaknesses against other decks. This is very cool, very sweet. Yeah, definitely love Plowunder and Foulworth. Those cards are fun, even though my last memories of them were them being played alongside Tron lands and all sorts of other fun stuff. No, it was like Eternal Witness and the Plowunder into Eternal Witness and the Plowunder again. I mean, it was just horrendous. It was nightmarish, really. Anyways, good memories aside, let's go on to the next deck. All right, and now we have the solution. Nothing weird here. Very typical list. This is, of course, the recently popularized Future Sight list. And the only strange thing here, or atypical, would be Mystic Crusader. This is a pretty sweet card. Pro black, pro red, and then we have Threshold. It gets a little bit bigger and has flying, so that's pretty cool. Like that card quite a bit. I'm not 100% sure about playing 4 Exalted Angel and 4 Lightning Angel. That seems a little dirtily, but I love Exalted Angel and Lightning Angel, so I can get the impulse of why you'd want to do that. So no big deal there. But whether it's optimal, I guess we'll have to leave that up to question. But pretty sweet stuff going on here. I like Mr. Crusader. Definitely a card I'm a big fan of, at least just from a nostalgia perspective. All right, and now we have Groatog, and this is again pretty typical Groatog list. Like I said, every time I see this deck, I'll always reiterate. I feel like I want at least one more 5-color source. So 4 City of Brass, 4 Mox Diamond, and I'd like like an Undiscovered Paradise, just to be able to cast these spells like always. I mean, obviously getting wastelanded or your Mox Diamond naturalized or whatever can leave you up a creek without a paddle. But I do like Ray of Revelation. There's obviously a ton of different enchantments that need to die, and this kills 2 of them, especially with the current popularity of Parfait. Certain stuff like our good friend Humility, certainly a big kick in the pants, so definitely want to watch out for that. So yeah, sideboard Ray of Revelation, pretty sweet. Really typical sort of sideboard stuff: Swords, Pyroblast, Pyroclasm, Disenchant, Chill, Armageddon, just a lot of good stuff. So yeah, definitely a pretty typical, pretty good Groatog list. All right, and now we have mono red goblins, and this is again the goblin creature base. This is pretty normal, all the stuff that you would expect to see. And then of course we have 2 Pyrokinesis in the main deck. Again, this is pretty sweet, great sort of pre-sideboard against a lot of the aggressive creature decks. Pyrokinesis, very powerful card, and certainly helps in those matchups. And in the sideboard, we have Pop, which is again a little unusual, but certainly not bad against super non-basic heavy decks, as well as Shattering Pulse. Especially for a deck like Goblins, which has a lot of mana, you can sometimes pay the buyback, so very good against decks with a lot of important artifacts that you want to kill. And of course, this deck is playing 3 Ancient Tomb and 1 Port. If I was going to do anything, I would certainly, I'd rather switch those numbers around, where Port is just a better disruptive card versus Tomb, which Tomb, again, just doesn't really solve any of the actual issues with the deck, and again, has diminishing returns and etc, etc, etc. But yeah, I'd rather just, like in my version, of course, I just play 16 Mountain, 4 Waste, 4 Port, nice and easy. Um, but other than the tomb, the rest of it looks good, looks fine. So there you go. All right, and now we have Sly, except this one, again, also playing a 1x main deck Lava Dart. Again, very good against the other aggressive decks. We have Crash, which is sometimes in place of Overload. However, here it is in addition to Overload. Crash is a very sweet card, very powerful, lets you curve out and still have your artifact disruption up if need be. So that's pretty cool. I like Crash. It's a good card. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's certainly a being able to overload something and then also crash the same turn can be important against uh, counter magic, things like that. So, yep, big fan of that. Big fan of Crash. Very sweet card. All right, and now we have zombies. This is again a fairly typical sort of zombie list. Um, not playing the four Rot Longs main deck, but playing two main deck, one sideboard. Playing Zombie Master again is another pretty sweet card, pretty sweet lord. And we have some more removal and stuff sideboard. So the one smother may look kind of weird, but if you're, again, if you need, I like playing like a couple pieces of removal, two or three main deck, I think is what I last had in my zombie list, like two smother or two edict or something like that. Um, but yeah, the 1x kind of looks a little wonky, but if you're actually bringing in extra removal and stuff, I mean, kind of depends on how your whole 75 is set up, but I don't think the 1x smother is that weird. And of course, the Eradicate, I believe Lund came up with this tech, which is pretty sweet, very good against certain combo creatures, very good against stuff like Dreadnought, stuff like that. So definitely a pretty interesting choice. I'm a big fan of Eradicate. It's a pretty interesting sideboard card. Definitely a really great sideboard card. So yeah, very cool stuff here. Very cool. All right, and now we have friggin' Dreadnoughts. Just Dreadnoughts for days. This, of course, is the blue-red Stifle Knot. And there's stuff I like and then stuff I don't like. Like, I'm not a big fan of Barbarian Ring. I just don't think that's really where you want to be. I mean, you already have like Bolts and Fire Ice and stuff as additional burn spells and Grim Lavamancer itself. So yeah, I'd rather just play Mountains. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the Lotus Petals either, because like your deck's already so strong versus um, like aggressive decks, at least if they don't draw like their sideboard cards. I'd rather just play something like three Mishra's Factories, typically is what I'll play, just as a way to actually grind out those last points of damage if your Dreadnought dies and you're only able to get into one attack. Uh, Also, fleeing is actually pretty interesting. Like if you're comboing out in a later turn, where you're able to get your Dreadnought into play, and they uh, are only able to like say Swords to Plowshare at that turn, you can fling it and get some value off it immediately, or if you get one attack in with it the next turn, and then they can only remove it at that point, then you can just immediately kill them in response or whatnot. So yeah, fling is interesting. Again, I'm not a huge fan of it. I see the logic in running it, but it's definitely kind of to me. So yeah, definitely. Again, I really like the red splash. That's what I've been playing forever. Is just because being able to deal those last few points of damage with Lavamancer, Fire Ice, Lightning Bolt, Mishra's Factory, and or even maybe like a Fairy Conclave. Um, that's really sweet. That's pretty strong. So gives you a little bit of a backup plan, makes you less all in on the Dreadnought plan, which I am a big fan. And of course, the sideboard, nothing too weird here. Um, Boomerang isn't that weird. It's a great way to deal with random stuff. So yeah, there you go. All right. And now we have Turtle Splash, which is the Gamekeeper deck. Basically, think of it as like the Gamekeeper Auriok Salvager sort of deck, you know, from Legacy from 2005, I think it was. It was a really long time ago, 2004, 2005, where you're able to like Gamekeeper in your one Auriok Salvagers and you mill your deck, and of course you get your uh, LEDs in the graveyard, and if you have like a spell bomb in there, then you can, you know, do your thing, make infinite mana, so on and so forth. This adds a bunch of extra steps because um, at least you are able to play Oath of Druids. So in addition to the Gamekeepers, you can have your Oath of Druids also oath up your Sapras and Bailiff, and then you can sack it with Altar or Therapy Flashback, as well as you get back the Animate Dead, and the animates the Bailiff, and da 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 da. So you go through this loop, and then you can mill out your opponent with Altar or Dementia. It's a very kind of wonky combo. There's a lot of different steps, but it's basically, again, if you're familiar with the Salvagers game deck from Legacy in 2005, a lot of the same stuff is going on there. Um, so in the sideboard, really interesting stuff. We got Crumble. Again, Crumble, of course, being a 1-mana way to kill Tormod's Crypt, which is pretty sweet. It also kills things like Null Rod, which stops Altar of Dementia and all your artifact mana and things like that. So that's an issue. So that's good. And then, of course, we have Symbiotic Worm. Symbiotic Worm, of course, is a nice sort of dodge where you can, you know, reanimate or animate dead your Symbiotic Worm, or you can oath up a Symbiotic Worm. Definitely pretty sweet. Uh, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, this is obviously not good versus Swords to Plowshares, but I'm sure there's some sort of reanimation strategy here that it's good against. It's not good against like bounce spells either. Yeah, not sure. Not sure. I'd have to ask. But anyways, interesting deck. Definitely a pretty sweet combo deck. Um, yeah, there you go. All right, and now we have well, it's just Parfait. It's just the Parfait list that as Rich Shea has been playing for a while. Nothing weird here. I don't know if we've ever talked about the Wing Shards. Wing Shards is a pretty sweet sideboard card. Uh, it's a great way to, you know, make your opponent sacrifices attacking creatures. You can sort of do cool stuff with it by, you know, casting your instance or whatever. Obviously, it's very good against your opponent, who's oh, and also, of course, you can Cunning Wish for it. Obviously, that's the big one. That's the big one. So being able to Cunning Wish for this can make them sack 2 things, which is pretty sweet. So yeah, Wing Shards, pretty interesting, neat card. Definitely good to see that thing again. And of course, the 1x Windswept Heath. When you want to, when you don't really want to put another basic in your tax deck, the fetch lands do a pretty good job. Obviously, Heath can get you planes, which is obviously the deck is more or less mono white. And of course, can also give you the Forest. Forest is pretty important for casting Oath of Druids, so nothing too strange there. So yeah, really similar to the previous lists. I think they had, I can't remember if he had, well, I think he had Triskelion last time, but I wasn't sure if he had Shard Phoenix off the top of my head. But yeah, Shard Phoenix, very good against aggressive decks. Triskelion is pretty sweet against aggressive decks too, and none of these creatures can be plowed. As long as you're careful, at least Shard Phoenix can just sack itself. Triskelion can deal some damage and ping itself with its last counter. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, interesting stuff here. But yeah, a lot of the same stuff we've been seeing from these Oath Parfait lists. So yeah, there you go. That's the first place list. All right. Wow, I hope you were excited as I am. So many decks, so many things I had to go through. Holy moly. A lot of really cool stuff, a lot of stuff that we had seen before, some interesting new tech, a lot of interesting cool stuff. So yeah, there you go. So that's about it, guys. So I hope you enjoyed this. So thanks for stopping by and have a great day.